we'll get started. So just give us the go ahead when we're ready.
We're good to go.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I really, really appreciate you joining us. This is a online forum, and we're calling these policy perspectives. And I've been doing these the last 4 years that I've been in the city council. And this is just really a great opportunity to bring to you, our constituents, thought leaders, government leaders, NCO leaders, people who are in the middle of the great policy discussions of our time, and giving you the opportunity to hear from them, ask questions, and get answers. And today we are so lucky to be joined by Murad Awawdeh, who is the CEO of the New York Immigration Coalition. And today we're going to talk about something that is top of mind for all of us, and that is the attacks on immigrant Americans and immigrant New Yorkers, people around the country. And I'll start by introducing Murad, reading a little bit about your bio, Murad, and then we're going to get right into the questions that you all submitted when you RSVP'd. If other questions come to mind, everyone, you can message them to Christopher Asma, who's in the chat here, ASMA, and he will relay them to me. And we're going to try to get to as many of your questions as we can over the next hour. First of all, Murad, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me, and I look forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much. So, Murad is a nationally recognized strategist and organizer. He has spent over 2 decades fighting for immigrant and low-income communities of color. He's president and CEO of the New York Immigration Coalition, which is the nation's largest immigrant rights organization. And he has helped expand protections for New Yorkers and secure over $10 billion in community reinvestment. And I thought that was a typo at first, Ron, but it's billion with a B. That is just truly extraordinary. As the son of Palestinian immigrants, Murad has led major electoral, legislative, and policy campaigns at all levels of government. He's welcomed tens of thousands of recent arrivals and mobilized hundreds of thousands against anti-immigrant policies. He serves on national boards and has been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, Vice, and many more. Murad, thank you for being here.
No, thank you again, and thank you for your leadership and always your partnership on making sure that we're defending all of our neighbors.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I want to start by, for those who may be new to this work, what is the New York Immigration Coalition, and what role does your organization play in protecting immigrants across New York State?
So the NYC is, as you mentioned, the nation's oldest and largest immigrant rights organization in the U.S. We were founded after and right about the time that this radical socialist president, communist by the name of Ronald Reagan, decided he was going to do amnesty in the United States. And leaders in the state of New York came together and said, we need a vehicle to help people actually get the resources that they need, to get the supports that they need to actually attain status and then citizenship. So that was the early version of the NYC, and we still do a lot of that work. But shortly after, in the early 90s, we realized that the NYC needed to do more, and that's when we became a policy, advocacy, and service coordination institution. We are headquartered here in Midtown in New York City Council District 3, and have been here for quite some time and will be here for the rest of the time. We have about 7 offices across the state. We have over 200 member organizations that are part of our coalition. We're a participatory democracy organization where, we have a brilliant staff at the NYC, but a lot of the things that we fight for are actually solutions that our members and our communities are asking us to fight for, so that we're all using one voice to deliver for as many people as possible. So that's what the NYC does. We are also part of several other national organizations like the Fair Immigration Reform Movement, which was also started by the NYC and a couple of other groups like us. We're state-based coalitions. There's about 43 of us in 34 states, and that's how we do a lot of our national work together because we know that our power comes in numbers across the board, and we want to continue to push for good policies that help everyone who calls this country home.
That's great. So the Immigration Coalition is there are many organizations who are part of your New York State coalition, and then you are part of a national coalition of other groups like the New York Immigration Coalition. I want to get to some of these questions that were submitted, including this question, which asks, what is different about the current immigration landscape, the current ICE landscape, compared to prior administrations? And why does this moment feel particularly destabilizing for immigrant communities?
So this is a great question, and I've gone back and forth on like how to answer it because I think it's important to give people always the context of why we as a nonpartisan organization and as an organization that sole mission is to defend and protect immigrants and ensure that every New Yorker has what they need, not just to survive, but to be able to thrive. I think that if you go back in history, not too long ago, well, it probably is too long ago, for some people. But I think the first time people saw immigration be starting to become, the policies turning towards anti-immigrant policies was actually under Bill Clinton and the crime bill that happened then. And that was the first time you start seeing some of these immigration pieces becoming that were civil, turning into criminal, but still largely remaining civil. And then under George W. Bush, we saw this effort prior to 9/11 where he had a compact with Mexico and Canada to actually create immigration reform so that we fix the broken system that we all know has been around for decades. Neither of these people created it, they just have made it worse. And then unfortunately, that got tabled. With the election of Barack Obama, we saw him make a concerted effort in trying to pass immigration reform. And then by the time he got to it, he had spent all his political will on getting the ACA, which we also love, and we're proud of that work that they did there. And now we see the ACA under attack by this administration and those tax credits being erased in one of the largest wealth transfers in U.S. history with HR 1, where they're taking away from the poor and giving to the wealthy for tax breaks. And then we saw President Obama also become the deporter in chief. No one had ever deported as many people as President Obama in history. So we then fast forward to President Trump 1.0, where he took the systems that every other president had built upon and weaponized them. And under President Biden, he tried rolling back some of those policies, but you also need legislative support for that, and that did not happen. So what we are seeing today is the culmination of decades-long bad immigration policy and someone who's weaponizing that bad policy to go after people. And what makes this moment incredibly different than the past presidents in recent history is that this administration does not care about the law. They do not care about people's constitutional rights. And that should make every single person who calls this country home incredibly, incredibly worried. Because if they're trying to say some people have rights and others don't, that means none of us do. So today the target will be immigrants. Tomorrow the target could be another community and then another community. And, I don't want to have to say the poem, but when they came after this group, I didn't say anything. And we all know how that poem ended. So I think for us, it really is this is the attack that they are literally doubling and tripling down on a daily basis. Since they came in, they've passed and put forward over 500 anti-immigrant policies. And their goal here is not to make America great. It's actually to make America white. And that's what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Yeah, no question. You had mentioned the Bush administration efforts for immigration reform. And I never thought we'd have a president as bad as George W. Bush. Turns
Yeah.
out we have. But what's your opinion of the immigration reform that George W. Bush was pushing? Would that have uh, been a positive step if that kind of reform had passed?
Every single president has had their own version of immigration reform. Bill Clinton had a semi weird version of it. George W. Bush's the, the version he campaigned on was actually pretty decent. But the problem there was also that he was investing billions upon billions of dollars to militarize our southern border. And that was an issue for our sister organizations at the southern border because that was also going to take away people's land. And there's a lot of ranching and farming that happens down there, and that was also an issue, right? So when we do this work, it becomes kind of uh I wouldn't say challenging or difficult, but like there's a lot of different pieces that we want. We want the entire system to be fixed, right? We want a fair, just, and equitable system for ways in which people can come into the United States so that they have a process that they can enter for admittance into the country. And then we also want to make sure that when there's challenges within the system, that there are right ways that you can channel those challenges. That is a very, I'm oversimplifying what immigration reform should be. But we also have now millions of people who don't have documentation in this country, and they should have a right to get on a path to get there.
Right.
So Bush's plan that he campaigned on was okay, but then the ones that actually got introduced after 9/11 were actually really bad. And they all failed. There used to be different, cohorts, the Senate Eight or the Champions of Five, whatever you would call them,
Yeah.
who used to really champion this. And immigration has always been a bipartisan issue where each side had a different reason why they supported immigration. And, going back to that radical socialist communist president, Ronald Reagan, he said that the demise of America will come from us closing the doors on new Americans coming into this country.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's a question about sanctuary, the term sanctuary city. We hear the term sanctuary city a lot. In practical terms, what does that mean? A sanctuary city, what does that mean for people in New York City?
So sanctuary policy as a whole, it's just public safety policy. At the end of the day, it says that if someone is a victim of a crime or witnessed a crime, that they should have no fear in going to law enforcement because law enforcement will not turn them over to immigration authorities. If you were sick, we just had COVID, and I think people often forget that COVID was just literally 4 or 5 years ago, and we were celebrating and clapping our pots and pans every night for our essential workers, which the great majority of them were immigrant workers, that if they needed to go to a doctor, they should go to a doctor and the doctor won't turn them over. That's simply what sanctuary policy is. It says you are part of our community and we welcome you. You belong. That is it. It is not, some lawless policy that says come here and do whatever crime you want. That's not it. It really is about making sure that people who call this city home have the sense of security and being active parts of society so they can live fulfilling lives. And that is it. So our city does have sanctuary policies. We have a sanctuary policy executive order that the mayor signs, which has been done for decades at this point. Even, the socialist communist mayor, Rudy Giuliani signed it because he thought it was really important to have. Um, and it's continued down that path, but we also have a couple of laws on the books of not sharing any data with immigration officials unless there's a judicial warrant to do so, making sure that our agencies understand what the laws are, that immigration officials are not invited into our shelters, which under the previous administration that just ended, we saw that 21 instances of that happening. That people, when they send their kids to school, that they should trust that the school community is going to be safe and that kids will not be, that school won't allow immigration officials in to go after children. That is simply what sanctuary policies are. And, there's been enough data that illustrates that sanctuary communities and cities and towns and states are actually 35% more safer than cities, towns, and states that don't have those policies.
Which makes perfect sense because if imagine a city where people who are undocumented in to any degree, didn't feel safe reporting a crime, didn't feel safe coming forward as a witness to a crime, didn't feel safe reporting that they were being victimized. The idea that sanctuary policies make cities and states and municipalities less safe, simply not true. There's a question about a warrant. We also often hear about ICE agents needing a warrant. When is a warrant needed, or is it not? Do ICE agents need a warrant to apprehend somebody?
That's a great question. We have a bunch of our rights are enshrined in our U.S. Constitution. And I often tell people, knowing what your rights are is not specifically just for immigrant New Yorkers. It's for everyone who calls themselves a New Yorker, and everyone who calls this country home should know what their rights are so that their rights do not get violated. So a judicial warrant is actually needed when they're trying to enter private premises. So your home, you know, private areas of your workplace, or private areas of other places, they would need a judicial warrant to enter to do enforcement. And what we're seeing is that even without the judicial warrant, they're still doing that. So when going back to my comments earlier about what makes this moment unique is that this administration does not care about the law. They are not, they really don't. And they're doing what they want, and ICE is operating incredibly roguely and lawlessly. We're seeing what's happening in Minneapolis, where Renee Nicole Good got shot in the face last night. A young man was shot in the leg. People are being beaten up in broad daylight on camera by ICE agents. Like, this is not what should be happening. This is not normal, and we should not allow it to become normalized.
Agreed. Here's a question about can ICE legally enter schools, shelters, or community spaces? What protections exist, and where are the real vulnerabilities? And I know that Governor Kathy Hochul addressed this question in her State of the State. I saw you up there on Tuesday rather, Murad. Speak to us about the ability of ICE to enter spaces like schools.
Here in New York City, because of our sanctuary policies, ICE cannot enter schools unless they have a judicial warrant, and that judicial warrant needs to be verified by the Department of Education before they even allow them into the building. So, any entity that is city run or has a city contract or is a vendor of the city needs to also abide by our sanctuary policies. So when we're talking about shelters, even if it's not a city run shelter, but it's city funded, they need to abide by our sanctuary policies as well. So what ends up happening is that in the 21 instances of the shelter situation, at some point the policy was being followed, but ICE didn't care and barged right in. In other cases, the proper process wasn't actually followed and they were let in. So those situations are the ones that we're asking this current administration to actually ensure we do an audit of what's happening across city agencies, vendors, and making sure everyone is actually abiding by our sanctuary policies and that we actually strengthen them, right? Making sure that every single staff member isn't just getting a one-time training because, you have to constantly remind yourself of what the rules and regulations are. So being able to do that in a way where people are getting constant training, maybe quarterly or biannually, and then making sure that the policies are being followed and there's systems put in place to ensure that those policies are being followed.
Talk to us about what legislation is on the table right now in New York State regarding immigration.
So there's several bills that we're fighting for here at the New York Immigration Coalition. The first and our biggest priority this year is the New York for All Act, which would prohibit the state or any agency in the state of New York in colluding with immigration enforcement, in colluding with family separation, gutting our communities, and destroying our local economy. And that's all New York for All would do. It would prohibit any entity in the state of colluding without a judicial warrant. Because if they do have a judicial warrant that's signed by a federal judge, we believe in the law, and that means that they have done their job and their due diligence in getting that warrant to execute whatever it is that they're trying to. So New York for All would take a lot of what we have in New York City and make it statewide. And why is that important? We have seen communities devastated, farming communities, manufacturing communities. Everyone who calls New York home, all 19 million New Yorkers who call New York State home are at risk by this agency. So why would we continue to allow them to wreak havoc across our state? Our state should say we are not in the business of separating families and we are not in the business of destroying our communities. We support our New Yorkers and we're going to do what we can. We will not collude with you on any of this. So that's what New York for All would do. The other bill is access to representation, which would guarantee people who are in front of immigration court, immigration lawyer. Many people often think because in our criminal justice system, if you can't afford a lawyer, one will be appointed to you. That's only in the criminal justice system and in other, in New York City in housing court, in family court, but that doesn't apply to federal immigration court. So we want to actually have a system, a public defender system that's similar to what we have in criminal justice system so that people aren't going up against a judge and a federal prosecutor whose sole job is to remove you from this country, who both are appointed at the pleasure of the president, by the way. So that's another piece of when we go back to immigration reform, why we want to reform the system is that should not be the case. We've already seen 17 judges here in New York City be fired because they're not 100% following the Trump administration's orders and really just denying people their applications for relief. The other two bills I would say that are, or three that are really important is the MELT Act, which is a bill that our amazing assembly member, Tony Simone, is fighting for, which would uh, pretty much allow us to have accountability. And that means that it is a bill targeting people wearing masks doing law enforcement. How are you supposed to hold anyone accountable if you get beat up in the street and not know who the person who beat you up is because they were wearing a mask and they never identified themselves? That is what the MELT Act would do. It'll allow people to have that accountability measure. The Radar Act is a bill that would make it a dashboard, really, of all the incidences that are happening across the state and then the human impact of what those incidences are doing to our state. So that's also another important bill. And the last one I'll mention is the New York State Civil Rights Act, which would allow for New Yorkers whose rights have been violated by federal law enforcement agents to actually have their day in court against that law enforcement agent. So those are, I know I spoke a lot about very critical bills that they should do, and all of them should get done. This isn't a moment where we need to be picking and choosing how we protect our New Yorkers. We need to protect them as best as we can every single day. And New York for All, access to representation, the MELT Act, Radar Act, and the New York State Civil Rights Act all need to get done this session.
We've been seeing a lot of things happening down at immigration court. We've been seeing ICE making arrests at immigration court in Lower Manhattan. What walk folks through what's happening down there? Why are these things happening at immigration court? What kind of cases are happening there? And why is ICE able to arrest people there if they're going to their hearings?
So, federal immigration courts are run by the federal government. Um, we won this amazing bill called Protect Our Courts Act back in 2019 or 2020. And pretty much it said federal immigration enforcement cannot take place in or around courthouses. So that protects our state and city courts. And the Trump administration has sued it when it first happened and just recently and lost both times because we have this thing called 10th Amendment rights, which allow for our states to actually create laws that benefit the residents of those states. And it just makes no sense why they would continue to fight these things when we have better things that we should be investing our time in, like dealing with the affordability crisis. So what's been happening at the federal courts is people are showing up for their appointment for immigration hearings or showing up for an ICE check-in, which is normal. And what's happening is they're being tricked and tricked to get there, trapped when they get there, detained, and then disappeared shortly thereafter. If you want to see what it just makes a mockery of our justice system. And that's because they were not successful in street enforcement earlier last year, they started to target our courts, and that's how they trap tens of thousands of New Yorkers who are literally following the process, right? These are people who are doing everything to the letter of the law and being tricked and trapped and then detained and disappeared from the courthouse.
What should someone do if they are stopped by ICE agents? What rights do they have in that moment, and what mistakes should they avoid?
So, first and foremost, everyone has rights. If you have status, if you don't have status, and you should know what they are. And I would really love if everyone can visit our website, which is nyc.org/. KYR. We have so many resources on that website. They're translated in dozens of languages. Visit it and you'll see everything you need to understand the moment we're living. Every single person has the right to remain silent. They also have the right to say, I do not wish to speak to you or answer your questions. I do not give you permission to enter my home without a warrant signed by a judge. I do not consent to the searches of my person, belongings, vehicle, or home. If I am detained, I want to contact my attorney. If you are not being detained, am I free to go? And you should remember that. If I am detained, I want to contact my attorney. If I am not detained, am I free to go? And as always, refuse to sign anything that you have not had an immigration lawyer review prior to you being presented it. So those are really critical and basic know your rights. It goes much deeper than that, but those are sort of the ones that you should always remember in your head because they're really important. And this is also important that U.S. citizens protect their rights as well, so that they're not saying, "Oh, well, this isn't just for this one community, we're doing it to everyone." Everyone needs to know what their rights are to meet the moment that we're facing right now.
Should should people carry proof of citizenship or immigration status at all times? And I never thought I'd be asking that question in our country because we were never a country where people in military fatigues would demand your to see your papers. That's something we would see in World War II movies, not here in our country. But should people be carrying those kind of documents with them?
I think it varies. We ask that people carry identification with them, and if they have any immigration documents, that they should be, making a copy of it and carrying the copy with them. Just because what we're seeing is this administration really doesn't care. They can say they couldn't identify that you had status. So making sure that you are able to have identification with you. I never thought I needed to carry something that identified me more so than just my driver's license or my New York City ID, which has historically done the trick to get me into wherever I was trying to get into. But these are times where I think people should have identification on them. And it's important that, you don't have to identify yourself if you're not being detained, right? So this is another reason why it's important to know your rights. But for those who are impacted, they should definitely be carrying um, they should we have a whole section on this about what information you should carry with you and what you shouldn't carry with you. But it is really important that we all know what to do in these circumstances. We just saw when they did the Canal Street raid here in Lower Manhattan, a couple at this point, it's like about 2 months ago. Um, they were stopping and detaining U.S. citizens, and you hear them screaming, saying, "I'm a U.S. citizen. Why are you stopping me?"
Mm.
And ICE doesn't legally have the authority to arrest U.S. citizens, but they have been doing that. So I think it's just important for you to just protect yourself as much as possible. And which is why solidarity in this moment is even more important and even more critical. That when we see these things happening, we're all raising our voices up.
So helpful. How should parents and caregivers talk to children about ICE and immigration without causing fear, but while also staying honest? We've got a number of folks on here with young children. What's your advice for how they should talk to parents about this?
There's an enormous amount of resources out there that help people walk them through having these conversations. I would not do them justice right now, but what I would say is don't assume your child doesn't know what's happening. I have a 10-year-old son who is someone who's always reading and watching what's happening in the world. And he is someone who is very aware and asks like, what can he do to help his, neighbors or his classmates if they ever, get taken. And I think that these are conversations that we have to have with humility, but also be careful because we also don't want to scare our kids even further. It's really to give them a sense of understanding that these things are happening and that there are people who are pushing back against it in a peaceful, nonviolent way to make sure that people's rights are not being violated. I think, but I would go back to my initial comment of like, there are definitely tons of resources to speak to children about situations like this.
There's a question about dreamers and undocumented college students. What protections exist now for dreamers? And have those protections held up that were put in place under previous administrations for young people who might not have been born here, but they've been here their entire lives? This is the only country they've known. What, how much of those programs are still intact?
So what we're seeing right now is this administration not really caring about statuses that people have. And we've seen them revoke status for millions of people, people on with temporary protected status, people with humanitarian parole. There is a DACA Supreme Court case that's happening, and there should be a decision later this year about that. I think right now, every single person who has some form of status should be seeking immigration legal counsel. And thanks to the work of the city council, the NYC has a ton of immigration legal clinics that we often have. And they're on we actually just put it back out on our social media. I think you might have shared it yesterday, but keep sharing it so that people see it. There's a registration link. You register, we give you an appointment slot, and then you go from there. We do these monthly so that people who don't have the opportunity to speak to a lawyer for whatever reason, they can't find one because everyone's at capacity or they're just too expensive and they can't afford it. People should know, have the conversation with an immigration attorney, understand what their ability to adjust is or what relief is available for them. And honestly, to also have the conversation if there is no relief available. Things change and conditions also change too. But having that conversation is really important. In addition to that, making sure that you are creating your family preparedness plan. Because God forbid, if you were to be detained, what happens if you have children? Like, what do you want to happen to your kids? Do you want them to be to meet you back where you're being sent, or do you want them to stay here? And if that's the case, who's their guardian? What happens with your finances? People have been here for decades, and now their status is ending. What does that mean for their home, their car, their assets? Um, so there's a lot of work that needs to, these are really hard conversations to have, but it's important to have them because it's better to have them while you can navigate and deal with all the things that you need to, as opposed to trying to do it while you're detained and it being nearly impossible to do so.
What should people do if they witness an ICE operation? What can people do to protect neighbors while also being safe?
It's a great question. First and foremost, I would encourage people to visit handsoffnewyorkcity.com and sign up for a training on how to um, identify what's happening. There's a lot of things that do happen in the street. Law enforcement happens all the time. A lot of people mistake NYPD as ICE. A lot of people mistake our National Guard because there's a lot of National Guard being deployed elsewhere in the country. Is doing immigration enforcement, and they're not doing that here. And they've been in the streets. They've been in at least District 3 for the past couple of years, doing like work at Penn Station or Herald Square, wherever it is. That work has been happening. But for people who are witnessing, enforcement happening on the street, it's critical that they actually double check that it's it's real immigration enforcement. And if it is, what they should be looking for is, remember, salute. How big is the size of what's happening? In addition to the size, where is this happening? What's the area of it? How do you ensure that you are moving carefully in that moment? Because you also don't want to inhibit um, what's happening, but making sure that you're recording what's happening. So S stands for size and strength. A is activity and action. L is location. U is uniform, specifying what kind of agent it is. T is the time and date. And then E is the equipment and the weapons that you are seeing. And then once that happens, you can call this number, which is 229-304-8720. Again, the number is 229-304-8720, to report the incident happening, and someone will go and verify if that's indeed an action. But when people see injustice happening, they should stand up and vocalize that, right? They should really make sure that they're uh, trying to dissuade this from happening. Obviously, we are engaged in peaceful, nonviolent resistance, and we want to continue to encourage New Yorkers to do the same. We don't want to fall for the trap that the Trump administration is putting before us, which is doing horrific things, trying to get us to react in a horrific way. We will not do that. We want to continue to fight for our neighbors, but also do it in the way in which keeps us all as safe as possible.
One thing I see in some videos of these interactions is people asking the person who's being detained, what's your name? So they can report back that that person's been, taken, so their family can be notified. Is that part of the trainings?
Sometimes yes, and sometimes it's better to ask if there's a phone number you can call for them. Um, because that is more helpful than just the name. So if, is there a number that we can call to let your family or friends know what happened to you? That would then also help see if there is like a pathway to get them legal services or supports, and what other things that their family may need. If it's a parent, they may know the neighbor's number to call the neighbor to go pick up their kids from school at dismissal. That's why it's important. And also then being able to connect back to the person later. Sometimes people don't want to share their name because they haven't given their name to ICE agents. So asking for the phone number is probably a better route to go down.
I volunteered at court on Varick Street as they have teams of volunteers. One of the things that the volunteers do is they, before the person goes in, they'll invite the person to fill out a card with the phone number and stuff. So if they are taken on their way out, their family can be notified so that they're just not disappeared to some unknown location. Here's a question asking, what are the most effective action that individuals can take right now to truly make a difference rather than just being symbolic?
So I think I referenced this earlier. I think if everyone who's eager to do something and wants to do something that is really going to help as many people as possible, I really urge you to join handsoffnewyorkcity.com. The New York Immigration Coalition is part of that coalition. We are doing a lot of work with our member organizations and with our partners in other spaces, and Hands Off New York City is one of those. You can get trained on how to do know your rights trainings, how to do documentation training so that when things are happening, that you're able to document it in a way that will be helpful down the road. Um, so many trainings. You can visit their website again. It's handsoffnyc.com. And we have been doing a lot of community canvassing, a lot of business canvassing, and Hands Off New York City is also doing that. and then being able to rapidly respond when necessary. And I also urge people to not wait for someone to come and help them figure out what to do. Organize locally. The best actions that you're going to see are the ones that are happening at the very local level by local folks stepping up to defend one another. Because if they're coming for us today, they're going to come for the rest of us tomorrow. And I think that's the other piece here is organize locally. Start with, if you live in a building, start with your neighbors next to on your floor and then expand onto the other floors. Go to the buildings across the street from you and build out that network so that it's a local network that's responding locally to things that are happening.
Question about comprehensive immigration reform. What does comprehensive immigration reform look like to you? In your opinion, if you were in charge and you could just write the policy, the federal immigration policy that would fix our system, what would it look like?
So I think one thing that becomes sort of always the lightning rod issue is entry, right? Like how people enter the country. And the reason why people go through great lengths to come to this country is because of our foreign policy that's destroying their home country. No one wants to leave their home if you don't feel safe, right? So that's the first thing I would do is also always put if we're doing any foreign policy, what is the impact of migration? That needs to be front and center. Everyone often talks about like what happened in Venezuela, like why did so many people leave? A lot of Venezuelans left because the US sanctioned, and those were specifically the Rubio sanctions of about 8 years ago that were put in place that then devastated Venezuela's economy, that then devastated the local economy and the people who were living there who had no opportunities left. They had to leave. And millions of Venezuelans left, the vast majority of them remaining in countries around them. So migration linked to foreign policy needs to be looked at immediately. That is generally what ends up happening. We're going to have a lot of climate displaced people. How are we going to deal with that? That's like going to be the next wave. And I'm not just talking about like internationally climate displaced people. We are going to become climate displaced people in the future. So we have to think about the different aspects. And yes, climate displacement is part of migration and immigration. We have to move if things were to change here. If our infrastructure and our policies don't change, we are going to be forced to leave. And then making sure that the entryways are equal, fair, and accessible. There are countries across the world that have various quotas that they get. And the closer you are to whiteness, the more access you have to come into this country. Um, and we've had bad policy targeting the global south for a long time. So fixing that, making it an equitable system so that people have different pathways to enter the United States. And then the other biggest piece is really making sure that we give people a pathway to normalize their status, to get into status that are here in the United States. We have to fix that immediately so that they can then contribute into our formal economy as opposed to just our informal economy. And people, regardless of their status, are paying into our tax system, but not reaping any of the benefits that come with that. So imagine living somewhere where you're paying into taxes for 50 years, but you can't benefit from anything that you're contributing to. Um, so I would say, you know, dealing with what's happening, that our policies are creating the challenges that people have to leave, thinking about the actual entire system, and then really basing the immigration legal system in a fair, just process. It currently is not. So that is why I think we see a lot of the challenges we're witnessing. And I always look for silver linings in life because sometimes things are just very bad, and like we're witnessing horrors happening upon horrors. And the one silver lining is like the Trump administration is destroying our everything, including our immigration system. So hopefully, out of the rubble that it is now, we can build something much better above it.
There's a question about the NYPD and ICE. What's the actual relationship between NYPD and ICE, and are there laws that permit cooperation between the two? When are they, under our city's policies, when are they allowed to work together?
So the NYPD generally does not work with ICE. That's prohibited by local law, agency policy. There are moments through joint task force that the NYPD does work with ICE, HSI, ERO, the FBI, ATF, DEA, all the federal agencies on, trafficking or drugs or gangs or other things of that or terrorism. But the NYPD does not should not be supporting ICE and civil immigration enforcement. That is where I think people often are worried because they think that that is what's going to happen. But we have to ensure that the NYPD is also following the process on civil immigration enforcement and that they're not colluding with them. I don't think that they have been, because if they were, I'd be the first person to be out there. There was an instance where police officer, which came out in a DOI report right before the new year, where there were several instances, but those were individual instances where I think of the five that were reported, one was an NYPD officer working with ICE to support them. And then there was moments where, the previous administration was trying to do some enforcement at a shelter, and I think might have invited ICE to come, and then the police commissioner shut that down. So like there are some checks and balances even when you have bad actors in the process, but we want to ensure that there's 100% compliance in all these systems.
Here's a question from someone saying, we are a food pantry. How should we handle guests who are approached by ICE outside of our building?
I would say if there's a way to make sure that people are able to wait inside, that would be ideal. And making sure that your staff, your frontline staff, are also trained on supporting people. There's several different reports that you as an organization should operate under, like creating the systems that you need and following processes that are put in place. If you're city funded, you need to follow the city local policies that say that you should not be colluding with immigration enforcement. And I know if you're doing a food pantry, there's a long line and you want to protect people, it may be more challenging when it's happening outside on a sidewalk. So if people are waiting inside, it may provide you with better protections for your clients.
Mhm. Here's a question just asking, why do ICE agents wear masks? What's the purported uh, justification for that?
I'm sorry, can you say that one about
Why
masks?
question submitted says, why do ICE agents wear masks? What is the purported reason for that?
Well, allegedly, as per people within the administration, the reason why they feel that they should be wearing masks, and this happened, well before any high stakes issues or challenges happened, was to protect the identity of the ICE agents because they were being quote unquote doxxed. I've not seen that, and also think that when you're in law enforcement, a big piece of law enforcement is following the law, and hiding your face is to hide from accountability. And there's no reason for them to be hiding their faces, but they feel that they need to. But that's the excuse that they're giving.
The question, interesting question, saying, can you discuss how different presidential administrations handled ICE arrests and deportation? For instance, President Obama was labeled as the deporter in chief, but ICE arrests were not like this during his administration. At least we didn't see this kind of behavior. What is the difference in the approach here? How did Obama uh, become the deporter in chief, quote unquote, without these kind of tactics?
So leadership starts at the top. So if people below the administration are acting in the fashion that we're seeing, it's because they're being encouraged to do so, or it's being allowed to happen, and no one's going to say, "Hey, what you're doing is wrong." The checks and balances in this country are sort of in a disarray in this moment. Congress is supposed to be, equal part of our federal government. The judiciary is an equal part. The executive is another part. And what we're seeing is that they've all coalesced under this president. So there is no accountability being held in this moment. But yes, President Obama was labeled the deporter in chief, but we didn't see ICE acting this way because they weren't, because they were following the process and they had a prioritization of individuals that they were going to go after and do enforcement on. And, that is what ended up happening. So we're seeing that some of the tactics that the Trump administration is engaging in are previous tactics, but also removing the guardrails from any of it.
Well, I really want to thank you, Murad, for coming on here. I know how incredibly busy you are, and the work that you're doing is so, so vitally important. And we really want to thank you for being with us here tonight. Last question that someone submitted, and I think it's a really good question. If you could leave viewers with one message about how communities can protect each other and build power in this moment, what would it be? Give us some hope for the future.
The opposite of, I know we're living in really fearful times, but the opposite of fear is hope. And the opposite of hate is love. And in this moment, we have to remember who we are as people, as New Yorkers. And, I often say this now is like, we're not always the nicest people, but we will fight tooth and nail to defend one another. And that is really a New York value. And I've seen that happen time and again. And I think in this moment, I call upon all New Yorkers to stand up and to really make sure that we continue to protect one another and that the times ahead of us, the times behind us are scary and the times ahead are also scary. But there is so much more power in our solidarity with one another. I encourage everyone to visit our website, nyc.org/KYR. Visit the whole website, but that page specifically. Learn what your rights are, learn how to protect yourself and then your community, learn about what's happening on the ground, and then join or create your own local organizing initiative. I think that that is what is going to help us transform this moment. And the last thing I'll say is that democracies are only as strong as the people who make them. And they fail often when the people in them decide that it's not worth fighting for anymore. And I don't think that we're there yet. And I encourage you all to continue to fight for our democracy because if not, we're going to continue to see not just fascist and authoritarian tactics, we're going to be living deeper into a fascist and authoritarian regime. And then there's no coming back from that.
Thank you so much, Murad. Really, really appreciate you being here and thank you for everything you do. I want to thank all of you here for tuning in with us tonight. Stay tuned for more forums like this in the very near future. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. And we'll talk soon. Have a good one. Enjoy
Take
the rest
care.
of your night.